So, our own devices is back after a break, a much deserved break, if I can tell you that. Our first guest who's going to be with us in this sort of new season is Suvig Sharma of MongoDB. We will be talking a lot of things, but we are primarily going to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the internet. And MongoDB is one of the companies that can tell you a lot about that. It is sort of the backbone for a lot of websites and companies around the world. Suvik, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nandagopal, for having us on this show. It is really a pleasure to speak with you and your audience.
So, Suvik, for us in the internet business, MongoDB is a very familiar name, but we also have a lot of people who might not know the company, what you guys do. Could you just start with that?
Sure, absolutely. So let me try to set a little bit of a context so that you can really understand what we do and appreciate the value that we bring to our customers. Uh, Nando, if you look at your own mobile phone right now, right, it is really filled with loads of apps. So, right from what you're ordering groceries to booking your flights to your medicines to even managing your bank accounts and a whole lot of things, right? So, in effect, today, every organization is actually a software company. And you, as a consumer, your impression about that organization to a large extent is also driven by the experience you have with their apps that's on your mobile phone, right? If it's efficient, it's highly performant, it meets your needs, it kind of uh, enhances that experience that you would have with that app, and thereby your impression of that organization. So it's really now very clear that software and that interaction plays such a key role in driving competitive advantage for organizations. And this is exactly what MongoDB helps company do. And we do two things primarily. First, we provide a platform for their developers to build the latest, coolest, and most innovative applications as easy as possible. And then what we do is when those developers build those cool applications, we provide a platform for organizations to be able to take that to a massive scale in a very sustainable and robust and very high, a secure manner. So, essentially, that's the value that we bring to organizations and thereby to the end consumers.
So this sort of flexibility or elasticity was not something that is inherent to the internet, right? This is not something we had before. You had to pre-plan for what could be a spike in traffic or like all of that, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a very valid observation out there. So, if you think about it, pre internet, you had a lot of legacy systems in place, right? And they were built for a completely different world. They were built to, optimize storage because storage costs were so high at that point in time. But then internet happened, social media happened, mobile devices happened, loads of different kind of data were being thrown at these various applications, and the legacy systems that were in place were just not fundamentally architected to be able to kind of take care of this changing scenario. So this is where MongoDB really started. And what we did is the first starting point was what we called a document model, which essentially at a very high level is aligns very well with how programmers, they program their applications. So that gave the flexibility, that gave the ability to ingest anything, that gave the ability to innovate and make changes very, very quickly and not get bogged down by all the backend changes that you had to make. So one aspect was that. Then the other aspect was the core infrastructure as well, right? So there were legacy infrastructures, but now what we have seen, especially in the last 2 years, is the power that the public cloud provides, right? So you can scale almost instantly. So the whole combination of an infrastructure that can scale on a few clicks, layered on top of that with a data platform that gives you that flexibility and scalability, is something that has really changed the game. So, and then obviously you have the people side of it and a whole lot of processes and frameworks of people moving from, these very large single monolith applications to creating a lot of microservices. And so, all of these things kind of came together, and that's why you're seeing, the organizations being able to match the scale that today's modern application really demands.
Also, when you talk about scalability, what happened during the pandemic, it was unprecedented, right? Because you had lockdowns happening across the world, which meant that the internet became the real world in a way for everybody. Like, because you were interacting on the internet, you were working on the internet, because you just could not
Yeah.
step out of your homes, and that meant that all of us witnessed what we call this COVID bump.
Yeah.
And it would have also put lot of pressure on the infrastructure, on the internet as such, right?
Yeah.
So how did you cope with that as a company? I'm sure you would have had got a lot of frantic calls from a lot of your clients across the world.
I think that's a very valid, point that you bring up. So let me try to explain that with a example, so it'll kind of put things in context, right? Uh, the fact that when the pandemic hit, a lot of things moved digital is something that we all have witnessed out there, right? Uh, we have a customer in the gaming side, Ludo King, probably very well known brand today. Now, Ludo King was fairly popular even before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, it just took it to a completely different scale. So think about it. Prior to the pandemic, they had about 150,000 users, simultaneous users, which is not small in itself. But overnight, they had to scale to 1.5 million simultaneous users. So we're not talking about scale of 1x, 2x. These are 10x, 12x, 20x kind of scale that they had to meet. Now, the good part was because they were on MongoDB Atlas, which is it's the first app data platform that's available out there. They were able to do that on clicks of buttons. They were easily able to scale up as and when required. So their teams were now not concerned about the infrastructure, the data layer, etc. Their team was focused on the application. How do I launch more and more engaging features? Because now suddenly there's this plethora of custom users that have come on board, right? So that's one kind of an example, right? We saw a similar example in the ed tech space. So today, 5 out of the top 10 edtech companies in India actually use MongoDB for a variety of different use cases. Now, think about what happened in the edtech space prior to the pandemic, right? And edtech was like a supplement kind of a thing. People, it was like, okay, nice to have kind of stuff, right? But suddenly, when the schools shut down, the colleges shut down, uh, you know, it became the mainstream, and now the entire load kind of went on the edtech platforms, and that changed the game completely, now both in terms of scale and reach, and going not just in the metro cities, but even in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Students suddenly now had access to quality content and quality teachers, which was not there prior to it. So we saw similar changes in the fintech spaces, and a lot of different places where this change really happened. And in each one of them, the common theme was, you needed a platform that allowed you to scale at an instant, so you didn't have opportunities of uh, planning it out over months and things like that. It had to happen instantly, right? You need also, because now there's so many companies that were kind of springing up in these spaces, you need to be able to really innovate and go to markets fast and faster than your competition, right? So I think those kind of things it became very came to the forefront as we saw the pandemic, what we witnessed during this pandemic.
So as a lot of companies suddenly hit the bump, you also had a lot of businesses sort of go down the bump because they
Yeah,
suddenly became irrelevant. So how do
yeah,
you work in a situation like that? Because you have an installed capacity and everything is working in a certain thing, and suddenly you fall off a cliff because your business has become irrelevant. It could be travel, it could be maybe a
yeah,
ticketing business for offline events.
yeah.
So how do you cope with something like that?
So the point of this of the whole platform and the data platform that we have is it not only allows you to scale up on an instant, it allows you to scale down on an instance as well. And we had these situations, not, it wasn't just because of the pandemic that we saw these situations, right? You think about a lot of these cricket fantasy league applications that are there, right? So
Just
what
easy.
typically would happen is when an IPL season hits or you have a World Cup, it suddenly peaks to very significantly high levels, and then when the IPL is over, it needs to drop. So if you have, and you could think of examples in the travel space that you brought up, or even in retail when there's Diwali and it kind of peaks, and then post Diwali again there's a bit of a down uh, slump out there. So what the platform actually allows you is to actually optimize as per your needs. So you can scale up on an instance when the traffic is hitting hard, and likewise when that's not the case, you can scale back down very, very easily. So that way you can really, really optimize your cost, and you can plan to do so. Now that's not possible with the legacy infrastructure that you have, because those investments, once you've made those investments, right? So you'll be in a situation where in those kind of scenarios, there's a lot of unutilized capacity that still would be there.
So, are you also seeing because of what happened in the past year or during the first lockdown and all? Did you see a lot of companies which were desperately trying to upscale, move, or become more contemporary with their infrastructure?
This is something that we really observe. So prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of companies that were discussing, moving to public clouds, modernizing their tech stack, trying to cater to all these variety of data that is coming in. But a lot of it were in the boardrooms and were not really being executed. Uh, what the pandemic did is it left them with no choice. So you had to accelerate that journey, and we've seen companies that were a little more ahead on that maturity cycle of moving to app modernization and looking to leverage public cloud environments, came out much stronger than the ones that were still mired with legacy infrastructure.
Other question I have is slightly philosophical. Do you think
So,
that the pandemic has sort of changed the internet as we know it? Like, has it structurally, has it philosophically changed how the internet would work?
uh, I think the pandemic has philosophically changed how consumers feel comfortable with digital,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Uh, and while there are many analysis and data points, I just have to look around in my family to see that, right? Prior to the pandemic, my wife was very cagey to do any kind of digital transactions, right? But today, all our groceries, uh, come from online, and even though things are opening up right now, we're still now using that, right? My mother, who's over 80 years of age, prior to the pandemic, would use a phone only to make calls, maybe an odd WhatsApp message forwarded here or there. But now, you know, she has a mobile banking app on her phone, and she's able to see her transaction. She's actually able to even open an FD on it. So the way in which consumers have opened up because of this, in terms of how they've adopted to the digital, I think that has been a big change, right? Now that change, I believe, even when everything opens up, and hopefully it should happen sooner rather than later. Some of those habits now will remain.
Yeah.
Now, there would be some areas where there would be some form of hybrid. So, for example, if you think about education, surely school, at some point schools and colleges will open, but the view of the consumer, what they had about edtech platforms prior to the pandemic and now has changed forever. So, I would anticipate there would be a more stronger collaboration between the edtech platforms and the institutes and create a true hybrid learning environment, as against edtech just being a supplement at some point in time, right? So I think at a broader level, the adoption of digital both by the consumers and then in return the response of organizations to that by moving very quickly and accelerating their journey onto a tech stack that's modern, onto a platform and infrastructure that's modern, and also being focused on trying to build the next cool, innovative feature. Those are things now are table stakes. Organizations that will win in future are the ones that will actually put the customer right center at the center of everything, and then build innovative services and experiences for that customer around and the faster and quicker they're able to do that, the stronger they will come out. So I think at a very philosophical level, I see those changes that have got accelerated.
So clearly, the pandemic, despite all its negativeness, it has been the catalyst which, sort of, the entire digital world was waiting for, and it's been a catalyst not just in terms of consumer adoption, but it's been a catalyst even in terms of the sheer awareness of products, right? People being just open-minded about doing certain things online, as you said. Like I see my dad, who's also 70 plus now, slowly discovering UPIs and the comfort of using something like that, right?
Yeah.
He does not have to step out, like, so obviously that is happening. But um, is it also creating a situation where now companies truly cannot afford to not have a digital front? In a country like India, we saw till a couple of years back, even in the media business, companies which were like, which were thinking that we will cross the digital bridge when we get there, and maybe
Yeah.
that's still a few years away, despite everything that's happened across the world, especially in the media business. But now you really don't have that option, right?
First of all, I would have really prayed and hoped that it didn't take a pandemic to accelerate the journey for people, right? Obviously, the pandemic is a horrible experience for a lot of us. But the fact is that it has driven people to respond uh, and make those decisions faster, right? A few years ago, somebody did say that, uh, software will eat everything up, right? Every business is a software business, and and now more so, because now the consumers are comfortable with it, and like I said initially, their impression about that organization is driven by that experience they have with their digital self, right? So if you think of any service today, chances are you have an app on your mobile for that service, right? And chances are that if you have a bad experience, you will switch in no time to
Yeah.
another service, right? So what that does is it puts that experience right up front and center. No question about that, right? If you do not have that presence, as an organization, you will struggle. Now what that does is it makes the people that are building those apps really at the center of things, which is the developers. So no longer can you build competitive differentiation based on a third party off the shelf software. You have to build your competitive differentiation, by building the coolest and most innovative way in which you can engage your consumers, and that makes the developer really front at the center of things. So as a business, we've right from get go, from when we were right from our start, we've always kept the developers at heart. So everything that we have done in that journey and every step of our roadmap has been to make that life of that developer easier, so that they're completely focused on innovation, getting that out very quickly. Now, another key aspect also becomes, all of us are sharing so much data on these platforms. As a consumer, I want to feel really secure that the information I'm sharing on these platforms are kind of protected by an enterprise grade security platform that provides enterprise grade security. And I think that again becomes a very critical aspect as organizations consider. So basically, for you to be able to then compete and create that the competitive advantage out there, you need a platform that allows you to really innovate and scale, and then scale, but scale in a sustainable and a secure manner, which is very important as well.
Absolutely. Security is something that's given now, and no company can take it for granted, right?
Exactly. There's just so much personal data that we share, with any of these platforms, and especially now with transactions and fintechs, and as a user, I would be only comfortable sharing that information if at the back of the mind I'm feeling very confident about the security that application offers to me. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a risk.
So in a way, it is trust in the company as well as trust in the entire pipeline of your interaction with the company, and that is something which every consumer is now literally aware of, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So that was Suvig Sharma, who is Regional Vice President APAC at MongoDB, telling us about this epochal shift we have in a way had during the pandemic, and how the internet is suddenly it was always on steroids. Now it has a double dose of steroids, and even if it comes down from this so-called COVID bump, it's going to come down at a much higher low than before,
Yeah.
and that is how the internet has changed. Suvik, thanks a lot for being on the show. It was very insightful.
Thanks, my pleasure, and thank you so much for having us on this platform. It was a pleasure speaking with you and to your audience.
So you're listening to Our Own Devices, and this is Nandagopal Rajan saying bye again. We are again back everywhere you listen to your podcast.